Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. I'm your host, Wendy Nystrom, and today's special guest is Rod Thaler. He is a board member of the Resilience Innovation Hub, as well as the founder of RT Mitigation. Welcome to the show, Rod.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. The work you're doing is actually very, very important with respect to climate change and risk management. Could you please, let's start with talking about what RT Mitigation does.
Well, first of all, people have joked it's Rod Thaler mitigation, but it's not. Other people have said maybe it's Reith and Thaler mitigation, but actually it's risk transfer mitigation. And if you think about it, there's a real dearth of catastrophe capacity out there, and people need to be incentivized to mitigate. And if you provide the financial incentives, people will do it. We've seen that in Alabama, with the big premium discounts. But risk transfer mitigation is something that should get the attention of insurance company executives and reinsurance companies, because what it means is finding a way to access broader capital and to create lower catastrophe losses by fortifying homes or making homes more resilient, to have a lower catastrophe loss cost, and presumably to be able to access broader capital and lower the cost to actually transfer catastrophe risk. And if that's possible, it's going to free up some funding, perhaps either de facto amounts that can be reapplied to further mitigate risk, which makes the risk transfer even better. Absolutely. So it's a recurring sort of sustainable thing where we need to find more capital dedicated to managing catastrophe risk, especially in situations where a social or environmental benefit is being served, and that could open the door to broader capital. But so I'm excited about it because it comes at a time when we know we have to do something to address the increasing amount of catastrophes.
Yes, I actually talk about this subject quite a bit, background in insurance, folks. So when we talk about climate change, we're on a precipice right now with respect to insurance and risk and mitigation, because we have more frequent storms that are more severe. So we are increasing that risk dramatically. And I just did an interview the other day where we talked about the lack of insurance out there, and the premiums are getting higher and people can't afford it. And as Rod was saying, it is so much more effective to mitigate the risk rather than recover from the risk. So stopping it before it starts. And the work that Rod's doing is just that. It's helping people figure out ways to incentivize that mitigation. Let's transition to talking about your work with the Resilience Innovation Hub. I don't think many people know what that would be.
Well, I met Richard Seeline, who is he worked in Wall Street, worked in Washington. That was a misstatement, and had very senior leadership positions. He knows his way around the Congress. He's got a lot of contacts on both sides of the aisle, but he's a connector. He's someone who he's brought together a number of different stakeholders. And there's a real urgent need to implement the CEDARS Act, which is the Community Disaster Resilience Zones Act. And there's a lot of people who are consultants who can tell you what should be done. Yes. But I think the difference is that Richard has assembled a group of doers, people who are actually saying, okay, how do we actually get stuff done? And he uses other words, but let's just say get stuff done. And he's driven to do this. And so the Resilience Innovation Hub, it's really an independent group of people. It's not people who are wedded to maintaining the status quo. And I think that's really important.
Yes, it is.
Because there's so much technology and so many advancements that you need to get a broader tent, let more people under the tent. Because believe it or not, there are some inefficiencies that have a constituency that's protecting them. So every inefficiency has a constituency. It's a shocking revelation, I'm sure. But by working with a really well-known architectural firm, Gensler, Reeves Thaler has been a very, very big supporter. He's heading up their resilience activities, and with incredible data from State Book Insights, and then getting former government people, Bullock and Haddo and others. There's actually about 18 different groups coming under the umbrella, under the roof of Resilience Innovation Hub. And what's interesting is you get people who are the end-line users, that you get the citizens, the community groups as well. So it's not just someone in business saying, hey, this is what we should do. It's people who are familiar with the resiliency environment, and people familiar with emergency management, people who have been in the trenches, but people who are actually used to getting stuff done. When I was a reinsurance broker, I only got paid if I got stuff done. that's my mentality, is keep it simple and get it done, because if it doesn't get done, all the great ideas, are for naught.
You just used the only acronym I'll ever use is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. it has to be kept simple, and the community engagement is vastly important, because if we cannot get the community involved to do community-wide mitigation measures, meaning if you harden one house, it's not going to really matter.
Right.
The fire is still going to take you, the floods are still going to take you. But if you mitigate entire communities, which is what the Resilience Hub is doing, Innovation Hub is doing, that will have the massive change that we need.
Right.
And when you talk about community disaster resilience zones, that is like a whole zone of community that you are trying to harden, make resilient, and mitigate that risk, stop the risk before the hazard starts. So can you share with us maybe one of your pilots that you're working on, just so people can visualize what the hub is doing?
So I'll give you the background. I was driving around Alabama, working under contract to the insurance commissioner, because they have done a great job of creating a residential wind mitigation program. And Jim Ridling, who created it with Brian Powell, who's now the director of resilience mitigation in Alabama, a terrific guy, with Charles Angel, who is the chief actuary. They were concerned about the stability of the insurance markets. And if companies, after large hurricanes, exit the state, it creates a huge availability crisis. So by hardening homes, by fortifying more homes, they're able to reduce they're able to strengthen the market. It helps to improve the residual market, so that actual business gets depopulated. It doesn't create shock losses for insurers who get hit with assessments. But the biggest thing is, when you fortify more homes, if you think about a hurricane coming in, there's say a 200-mile wind field. The peak wind speeds are usually in a 25 to 50-mile corridor, and the wind speeds degrade or go down as you go laterally or as you go vertically. So most wind speeds, even if it's a hurricane of, let's say, category 3 or 4, which would be rare, of let's say 130, 140 miles an hour, those wind speeds are only in a 10 or 15-mile corridor, and they go down to 120 or 115 or 110. And it's possible, realistically, commercially possible, to protect up to about 115 miles an hour. I think that's what IBHS would say. So what happens is that 200-mile wind field, you can now protect 75% of the wind field. So you're narrowing the field of the most severe damage. And when you narrow the field of most severe damage, that has so many positive benefits. It helps to reduce post-event demand surge when prices go up, because if there's a larger area that's affected by severe loss, it creates a greater demand for reconstruction. So prices go up. So anyway, I think your question, what was your question? That was what pilots we're doing. So
just so people can get a visualization.
Sure. So we've actually made a formal presentation to FEMA. I've been talking with FEMA now for 4 years. I've started making formal outlining the ideas, and I want to just do a shout out to Victoria Salinas and the people there, Janine Peterson and Pam Williams. They're doing a terrific job. These are people who are really terrific, hardworking FEMA leaders focused on mitigation, and they're just tireless in their efforts. So this pilot is to get to the next generation. I did a trial pilot up with Hobart William Smith, where I had a student for a year work with me. And what we did was we were looking at ways to engage the private sector and teaching him about resilience. How do you articulate the value of resilience? Well, first of all, what is resilience, you might ask? I was thinking about the 3 little pigs, and I don't mean this, I hope no one's offended, but there are 3 little pigs, and 2 of them, they built their houses of straw and twigs, but the third one built his house of brick. Well, when the old big bad wolf came a calling, it wasn't as good a situation for the guys, the pigs in the straw and the twig house. So fortifying your home, you don't have to make it a brick house. I don't want to be piggish and say we have to spend a lot of money and make it a brick house, but just keeping the roof on the house is going to make it secure. And so the mitigation efforts is the effort to make it, to fortify it, to make it more resilient. The resiliency is the benefit of being that little pig inside the house, of the brick house. When the storm comes, you're going to be in a more resilient position to better withstand whatever the perils are outside. So anyway, I digress. So
great analogy though. Fabulous. I mean, perfect analogy.
There are great ways to articulate the value of resiliency. Every business, when I drove around Alabama trying to convince people to support Strength Alabama Homes, I put together, really nice looking slide decks, although my kids tell me they're like fifth grade quality. But they were, I thought, making the point to Mercedes and to Airbus how they benefit from resiliency by improving their workforce management. They could identify certain employees based on performance who they can incentivize and help fortify their home. Maybe a copay in the cost of the fortifying the home, or for workforce management to attract and retain workers, or for business continuity. So I was visiting with a big plant, Austell, down in Mobile. They have 4,000 employees. I talked with a manager there, and I said, well, what happens after hurricanes hit? Do you have a lot of absenteeism? He said, oh, yeah, well, we get 200 or 300, 400, a lot of people, more than the usual Mondays with people calling in sick. But so I said, well, if you keep track of those stats, we could help you do an analysis to show the cost benefit of helping to fortify homes. Because it's important to be able to get back up and running and not have downtime because they have so many government contracts that they're losing money that they can bill the federal government. So workforce management, business continuity, there are ways to appeal to the enlightened self-interest of business owners because they can do good things for their surrounding communities that are good for their business. They're good for their operational results. And you see this more and more that human resources are looking at benefits to create benefits that reinforce the company's goals so that they're really tied together. So that's something I tried. But now in this pilot that we're recommending, I mentioned this to Janine Peterson, who's one of the top people at FEMA, that I think some of these businesses will bite our arm off just to get a chance to be one of the companies in the pilot, because we're looking at raising money and giving a 30 or 40% discount. So paying 30 or 40% to prime the pump to get some of these businesses to say, that sounds pretty good. We'll get them to do it the minimum number of employee homes and maybe commit for 2 or 3 years or maybe 1 year. But the point is this, is once they start to see how easy this is to do and how beneficial it is to their business, enlightened self-interest is alive and well. And one of the things we need to do to move resiliency efforts forward is to harness enlightened self-interest. Yes. Because that takes every FEMA dollar, every federal dollar, and we're going to multiply the value of that. And so the pilot, that talks about the money. The pilot is going to create force multipliers in terms of students who get so passionate. I saw this in my 1-year internship I did, how excited. I mean, you might get the feeling that I'm a little bit passionate about this. So what I'm trying to do is to make my enthusiasm for the subject infectious. And I was going to retire and teach history from, at 55, and I didn't do it because I was too consumed with making money. But lavish lifestyle, whatever. But the bottom line is this: I could not get over how enthusiastic these students were, and so getting them fired up. And every state has state universities. So I'm looking at Alabama and Mobile, the University of South Alabama. There's a Bishop, which is one of the historically black colleges. Also want to work with them. We have a member on the Resilience, the Innovation Hub, who is one of the leaders in Black college history, I think David Smith. But so the point is this: we want to get to students and educating them. They can develop skills that will help them get jobs. And this is in an area where there's a crying need for people to help. And so it's a mutually beneficial thing, matching people up, getting them excited. Millennials, next gens are craving the opportunity to make a difference, right? Yeah. So, and I have 4 kids, and I know they all want to make a difference. The biggest thing I want to do is want to get Dad to stop talking. But in any event, the bottom line is this: these pilots, we've got 2 scheduled, one in Mobile and another one in Charleston. We'll probably do one in Houston. We'll get the students fired up, and educate them, and then we'll provide guidance. I've got a great group of guys. Roger Perret, who is the former chief underwriting officer of at the Hanover companies. He's the vice chair of Insure. I've got George Reith, who is he founded Willis Re and was my mentor. He was the CEO of Willis Re, one of the greatest investments made by KKR, as well as other people. My brother Warren Thaler, who is president of Gund Investments, and so we've got different people with different skill sets coming together, and then of course all the parties under the hub of the Resilience Innovation Hub. The Leadership Connect is a great tool. That Richard Seeline is going to be developing. We've got insurance regulators. We've got Eleanor Kitzman, who was commissioner of in Texas and also in South Carolina. So it's an interesting collaboration of people, and we're not wedded to maintain the status quo. So I tell you the biggest thing, and I think this is a critical point. I want to simplify this pilot is not just to be nice and teach people and educate kids. This is going to be learning with impact. Learning with impact. So rather than just doing something just to educate people, these students are going to be part of creating a portfolio of risks that we're going to fortify, and we're going to apply a streamlined treaty reinsurance approach where we take the best practices from treaty reinsurance and streamline it. So that FEMA, when I was sitting in a bunker in Clinton, Alabama, they told me the process they had to go through to apply for funds from FEMA for mitigation, and it would just choke a horse. It was just
that is true.
And I said, listen, there's a better way. We can take the best practices from treaty reinsurance, and it's like migrating from facultative individual reinsurance to treaty, which is much more efficient. And a light went off, and that's why I've been so focused on this, because I made a presentation which people can get a copy of. It's creating force multipliers for catastrophe mitigation. I did that in 21, and I did a more recent one, learning student resiliency internships, learning with impact. So the impact we're going to have is we're going to hire one of the smartest, I come from Boston, the smartest people in the resilience world, who's Nancy Watkins, who has been a big supporter of mine for these many years. And we're going to collect the information we get. We're going to show how we can cut the time to fortify homes from the day one. We can do it in 6 to 8 months, as opposed to waiting for FEMA and taking 2 to 2.5 years. So we're going to streamline it. I've gone through and done a side-by-side comparison. Thanks to the emergency management people up in northern Alabama in Huntsville. They gave me the PDF, so I was able to go through the FEMA BRIC application. And it must have been during COVID or something when I had so little time. My kids always said, Dad, you should retire and go play golf or do something. But I was there going through this 45-page application. And what I did was I took the best practices from the state mitigation programs. There's a great program in North Carolina, Gina Hardy. In South Carolina, Ann Roberson is doing a fabulous job with their South Carolina program, and then Brian Powell. So I took the best practices, because they streamline this on a web-based system. Nice. It's never too late to let common sense intervene. Some of these questions, what happens with a FEMA application, as with any government application, they have so many questions they could put in over the years, and nobody ever takes anything out. It's like hoarding all this stuff, and so it needs to be cleaned out. So I went through and I looked at this from the perspective of FEMA, their fiduciary responsibility, but I looked at it from the standpoint of streamlining this. And I came up with a template, which I think will work, applying a much more straightforward questioning without reducing the financial integrity of the questions. And this is something that you just seen Gary Peters, Senate Homeland Security Committee, and Senator Cassidy from Louisiana. They just put out a bill to simplify FEMA and accessing federal funding. So these pilots, pilots we're talking about doing. And I mentioned Nancy's name, and so Nancy's going to help me put this all together with her actuarial credibility to show to FEMA what's the upside for the country. How do we benefit as a country? How do the states? And I've done some analysis of the fiscal benefits, the stimulus in the states, because it's huge. It's before the loss. There's a way to get people working, and to go in. And Brian Powell came up with a great idea, which was creating these 13th grades where we go into impoverished communities and we create training for some of these communities like Africatown in Mobile, where the last shipment illegally of slaves came into the United States. or we go into Sandy's Island in South Carolina, where the first shipment of slaves came in 1565, way before James. Anyway, so what we want to do is we want to go to some of these communities where we're going to look to do work and try to hire and train some of the people, maybe to be inspectors or to work with some of the contractors, so that this is something where, we're trying to, and Larry Bacow of Harvard, who I talked to about this, because Harvard made a $100 million commitment to address their entanglement with African-American slavery. And Claudine Gay, who is now taken over as president, as first African-American president of Harvard, she, I think, will be supportive of this, where we're not going to ask for Harvard to give us a lot of money, but they could be conveners of sharing best practices. I mean, getting people up at the JFK school to share what the best practices are in terms of states accelerating mitigation efforts, how they can make outreach to the private sector. And also from a research standpoint, getting universities to tap into the empirical evidence that helps to quantify, the benefits of resiliency way beyond what a simple mind can come up with. I mean, there's a lot. For example, you look at the debris removal issues that come after a storm. So many local budgets are disrupted because they have to pay for all this debris removal. But what's the environmental cost in terms of the toxic waste that's finding its way into the landfills and the streams, all the toxic waste. Once the roof comes off a house, all the stuff inside gets thrown out, and so that becomes an environmental concern. But the bottom line is this: getting people excited. This is not about dictating to people how things should be done. This is about helping to share and enlighten people as to the benefits, because we each have a dog in the fight for resiliency.
Very true. And, I wanted to just go back when you talked about FEMA and the application process. It is extremely difficult. I was at a wildfire summit in September, and there were people there that they gave a statistic. I forget. It was a very high number of people are actually rejected from their FEMA applications because they just filled it out wrong, or they didn't know how to fill it out. So streamlining it, that personally to me would be an extremely important factor to execute quickly, because a lot of people are missing out on funds simply because they don't know how to fill out this application, which is very long. It's a very complicated application.
Yeah, I have an interesting exhibit. I've tried to simplify things, but the goal in life is keeping it simple. Home retrofits are not rocket science. A big issue comes up with a cost benefit analysis, and it can be simplified. But what's really cool is that all these different states can become de facto innovation labs, where they can, things that they do to access the private sector. For example, working closely with community foundations and with impoverished communities. So, for example, the South Alabama Community Foundation working with Africa Town and local businesses to create a systematic approach, and to work then with universities like Harvard, or Brown. Brown has made a significant commitment to their African-American history of entanglement with African-American slavery. So, now we get some wicked smart people who could be bringing good ideas to the table. And but the biggest thing is businesses can benefit. Doing good is good for business. And I'm pretty excited, pretty pumped up about this, as you might imagine. But I think the biggest thing is I come to praise the reinsurance industry, not to bury it. It's a kind of a takeoff on Mark Antony's funeral oration in Julius Caesar, when he said, "I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him." Well, I come to praise the insurance and reinsurance industry, not to bury it. The fact that they're running headlong away from catastrophe exposure and wildfire and certain things, they can't really continue to do that. They need to make a stand. They need to dig in and mitigate, improve the risk. And I say this as a 40-year veteran of working with FM Global and Legacy Allendale. They are probably the best at loss prevention in the world, and I think that's generally.
FM has a very good reputation.
And having been their top advisor for so many decades, I was with them, and then they created their performance-based exposure models, where they got basically lower cap modeling scores because of the protection, the prevention. And what I want to see happen is work with CoreLogic and which is a great firm, Milliman to create more sensitive cat modeling, because there has to be an inducement for people to fortify their homes. That comes in the form of wind premium discounts, but also for other perils. And I think there needs to be a competition amongst the best firms to create the best mitigation programs for the other perils as well. But you start with wind because it's more advanced at this stage. But once that happens, the real excitement here for insurance companies, if they're CEOs, they have to get off this this notion that they have to continually grow their premium. They need to think about bottom line profitability. I know they think about that, but so many public traded companies, they don't want to give up the volume. But I can tell you right now that someone like Nancy Watkins and others in actual field, and I could even do it myself, although it would be a little more cryptic, is to show how investing in mitigation, fortifying homes systematically, supporting state mitigation programs, will reduce the volatility of their net retained losses, but it also reduce their residual market charges, and it will reduce the cost to buy reinsurance. And so they do have a lot to gain, but they're not running to the party here, because as I've learned from their trade groups, they don't want to be told by insurance commissioners how to use their capital. And they view that when they have to have mandatory discounts on premiums, that is a de facto mandate to them as to how they use their capital. So they need a checkup from the neck up. Okay, they need to see how they can benefit, because they will benefit, and we'll show that empirically. And but there are some parties in the industry that benefit by volatility. I won't go and point out any names, but every constituency has every inefficiency has a constituency, I should say. So, but I think getting the insurance industry behind us is going to be really important. It would probably be the most tangible thing they can do. And once you get other industries like supporting fortifying homes, it becomes a de facto quota share for the benefit of the insurance industry. So the more they look into this, I think the more they'll catch on. And I think that's the exciting part of this, is that it can be something where the insurance industry can be a leader in making the country more resilient.
No, you're absolutely right. And the insurance industry does need to do a little bit of change. I mean, I talk about insurance and climate quite a bit, and I've interviewed numerous people. And the big thing is the effective communication, because when I first left the insurance industry, I was actually hired to teach a class called Insurance 101 for Climate Activists, because people kept asking me, why don't you just cover climate? And I said, well, what part of climate? And they said, just climate in general. I'm like, well, that's not a tangible risk. You can't really do that. And then the second factor is, when they say, why are insurance companies keep raising rates? It's like, well, as a friend of mine coined it, she said, they're not a charitable institution. They have to make a profit. And what Rod is doing is he's trying to make that bottom line profit more tangible by doing the mitigation techniques with the Resilience Innovation Hub. And I love the fact of the education aspect. The students you're right, students and the younger generation, they want a purposeful life. They want meaning to their job. We are seeing that, and it's extremely important. And the fact that you're educating and teaching, and you're also doing apprenticeships. I saw that in the write-up. Before I let you go, could you just explain really quick about the apprenticeships that you guys are doing?
Yeah, well, many of the other thing I think is important to mention is that FEMA is doing a terrific job, but FEMA is like Charles Atlas holding up the world. Every time there's a crisis, they get called in. Yes. And there's so many other government agencies. The Small Business Administration is a terrific, they've got some terrific leadership there, as well as HUD and other Department of Defense. They all have a need to address this, and they all are focused on young people and should be. Apprenticeships, people working alongside. I did my thesis at Harvard on a man who was started as an apprentice and to a merchant in Boston, went on to become a very successful merchant during the Revolution. But so you do your 7-year apprentice. We're not going to do 7 years, but people working alongside. We've got some terrific senior executives, people who some are retired, who feel the same way as I do, and who are very articulate, more articulate than I am, and are able to communicate what they've learned. And it's passing on what you've learned is a great way of, I think the people passing it on benefit every bit as much as the recipients. And so the sense of value, the sense of being, that, I'm not, you retire and, you've lost the ability to throw a 95-mile-an-hour fastball and nobody notices. So it's a great way to stay relevant. And you see people get excited. And so apprenticeships, in short, will be getting people to help the state mitigation programs. They don't certainly have enough people. I know Brian Powell does so many different functions as director of resilience, and I know Gina Hardy in North Carolina and Ann Roberson. They are all really dedicated, hardworking people, but they would love to have people who could be focused on this and could help expand the sources of funding. And so it's a win-win situation. It's good for the young people, and it's good for the institutions and for the states.
It is nice to see apprenticeships making a comeback, hopefully paid, because not everybody can.
Absolutely paid.
Yeah, because I hate it when people are like, oh, it's an unpaid internship. I'm like, well, that's not really.
It's called exploitation.
Yeah, it's not equitable for everybody. So I love the fact it is paid, and learning, as you said, passing down knowledge. You can read every book, you can go to every class, you can do webinars. One-on-one learning by doing and learning from someone's expertise is invaluable.
And by the way, you mentioned books. I don't want to appear to be illiterate. If you look behind me, I have 2 sleeping dogs, but I have no books, very few books, because we've already packed up. We're moving after 20 years in one house, and we're moving next. And so this is going to be the last time I speak to anyone about anything other than moving for the next week.
Moving is hard. I stopped counting after my 20th move. I'm like, I cannot even look at that anymore. So I get it. But Rod, thank you for your time today. I know you've got a lot going on. You're very busy moving and your RT mitigation and everything. How is the best way for people to find you if they want to engage in what you're working on? Sure. You can reach out to me on my website, or reach out Rod at rtmitigation.com. Rod at rtmitigation.com, or my cell phone, 516-244-3336. I'd be more than pleased to talk to people. I do have a few other jobs I do. I'm the director of traffic flow at our local food pantry. So, but I'm looking forward to these pilots and the teaching. And also, just a shout out to Richard Sealine for all the good work that he's doing. Magnificent person. Yes, he is. He's definitely doing a lot of good in this world. There is no doubt. But thank you, Rod, for your time. The work you're doing is extremely important, from the community outreach to the education to just trying to fix this precipice that we are on. Because I just did an interview talking about how basically insurance risk is financial risk. And if we have catastrophic losses, it will have a domino effect through our entire financial industry. So it's very, very important that we focus on the insurance aspect, get the mitigation in place, and stop these, disasters from affecting our homes and communities as a whole. So thank you for your time. I really do. One last word. It's just remember, it's never too late to let common sense intervene. And some people find that difficult. No, thank you, Rod, for your time. I'm Wendy Nystrom, your host with Environmental Social Justice. Please check out Rod. It's rtmitigation.com. Excellent organization, great group, doing good work, Rod. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Take care. Thank you very much.